Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, there's still plenty of speculation in Scotland if and when Nicola Sturgeon might call for a second independence referendum. Immediately after the Brexit vote, the First Minister of Scotland said a second referendum was, quote, highly likely. But with the polls not showing clear public support for that, in recent days it's been suggested the SNP has put another vote onto the back burner, at least for now. We're joined by our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, in Glasgow. Sarah, it's nice to see you again. What do the polls say at the moment on Scottish independence?
Well, if Nicola Sturgeon was relying on a Brexit bounce to increase support for independence, she will have been disappointed. There was a slight uptick after the EU referendum, with some polls showing support for independence over 50%, but it seemed to have settled back down now. The most recent poll was published on Sunday to coincide with the 2-year anniversary of the 2014 referendum, and that had support for independence at just 48%. So it's not easy for the First Minister to make a decision on this now, because she has previously said she wouldn't want to call another referendum unless it was sustained support for independence around about the 60% mark. Now, we all know polls aren't always entirely accurate about these things, but if it's polling below 50%, it's hard to see how she could call another vote.
What is the policy at the moment? Is it to have another referendum as soon as possible? Or is it to wait until the Brexit deal, quote, is done, when we all then know the terms of the divorce, and then have the referendum? Is there any clarity on the timetable or the principles that could govern a second referendum?
Well, there is a debate going on within the party about exactly that. There are senior SNP figures who are keen to go for a vote really quite soon, who talk about having another referendum in 2018. And the reasoning for that would be that if Scotland votes for independence before the UK actually exits the European Union, then they hope maybe Scotland could be a continuing member, never actually leave the EU. There are others who think that that'll be too soon, that it's difficult to ask people to make such an important decision about Scotland's future when they don't know what the terms of Britain's exit from the EU will look like. And there are people who think that maybe if the Conservatives were to win another general election in 2020, and if the Tories are still have very little representation in Scotland, only one MP that they have at the moment, that that would look more like a democratic deficit than the EU referendum result, that they would be able to argue then Scotland and the rest of the UK are going in such different political directions they can't stay together, and that that might be a better argument than Brexit actually for independence.
All right, Sarah Smith in a rather sunny, beautiful-looking Glasgow there.
Twas
good
ever
to
thus.
talk to you. Well, you and I both know that's not true. But it's good to see it when it is true. We're now joined by former Scottish Secretary Michael Forsyth, and the SNP's John Nicholson is still here. John Nicholson, what is your view? When do you think there should be, if you think there should be, a second referendum?
Well, of course, I believe in independence, so I'd like to see a second referendum. I think Sarah Smith's analysis there was absolutely spot on. There's a lot of new members who've joined the party. You know, there's over 100,000 members, and a lot of these people who've come across from the Labour Party in particular are absolutely desperate to see a referendum as soon as possible.
So what I'm asking is, when would you
personally
like to see one?
Well, we're in a bit of a phony war at the moment because we voted for Brexit, but we don't know what the deal is that's on the table. Sarah's absolutely right. The polls still show less than 50% of people supporting independence.
So you probably wouldn't want one now, then?
Of course you don't want one now.
Because you might lose it again.
Because, exactly, you don't want to hold a referendum until you think you're going to win it. But people are going to start and focus on what Brexit actually means. And I don't think the Prime Minister can keep up this line that she uses, which is, we are not prepared to give a running commentary on the negotiations. People both south and north of the border are going to want to know what the deal is.
No, I understand that, but I'm still trying to get... I know that your party has got several views in this. I'm trying to determine yours.
OK.
Should you have a referendum while the Brexit negotiations are going on, or should you wait until you know the shape of the deal and then call a referendum?
I think on balance we should know the shape of the deal so that people know what they're voting for. I think that would be the most sensible thing. I also think it's probably, on balance, the fairest thing for the electorate, so that the question that they're being asked is put with the most information possible on the table.
So not be for another 2 years at least.
That would be my view. I know others disagree,
I
as you said.
I understand. Michael Forsyth, is it not inevitable, given that Scotland voted quite substantially to remain in the EU, that this Scottish independence business is back on the agenda?
I don't think so at all. I mean, if the SNP want to hold another referendum, then they should fight an election with a manifesto that makes that clear. The manifesto actually said, we believe that the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if it's clear that more than half of the people in Scotland want independence. Now, we've got Alex Salmond saying something completely different from Nicola Sturgeon. And the most striking thing is the contempt that the SNP show for the clear decision, 55% of the Scottish people voted only 2 years ago to remain part of the United Kingdom. And in their manifesto in the May elections, they said, in 2014 we held a referendum that got people across the country talking about what kind of nation we want to be and how we want to be governed. No, we didn't. We took a clear decision, which Alex Salmond told us was a once-in-a-generation decision. And what they're doing now is hugely damaging to Scotland, creating uncertainty, and of course reinforcing the view that you can't believe anything that politicians tell you.
But of course, well, what politicians, unionist politicians, told the Scottish people in the referendum was that the only sure way of remaining inside the European Union, which was the settled will of Scotland, was to vote for the Union. That an independent Scotland could not be guaranteed inside the EU, and now that sure way has turned out to be a sure way to the door.
Because of a decision taken by the British people.
Yeah,
but I have to say, Andrew, that the only argument I could think of in favour of independence that would have made me vote for independence was a way of getting out of the European Union and never being able to get back.
As on many views you have, Michael Forsyth, that is a minority view in Scotland.
Indeed it is. But when you say it's a minority view in Scotland, it's a pretty substantially held view among proper Scottish nationalists. If you look at a place like Dundee, which is the most nationalist town in Scotland, 40% of the people there voted to leave the European Union, because there are a lot of people who believe that Scotland should have more control of their own affairs and realise that staying as part of the European Union is a contradiction.
If, John Nicholson, if you were to have this referendum, so the Brexit deal is done and Britain is on the way out, and we now know the terms that that we're out on. We're talking about, I guess, 2019 or whatever. Could you go to the Scottish people and guarantee that if Scotland voted to leave the UK, it would automatically be a member of the EU?
We don't know that yet. Certainly the. So
you could end up being out of both of them.
I love the fact Michael Forsyth is laughing at that, because it really takes some chutzpah for a Tory politician, as you rightly say, who promised us that staying in the Union would guarantee our place in the European Union.
Answer, but what's the answer to my...
Well, the
answer you could end up actually being out of, if you voted that way, out of the UK and not in the EU.
The answer is that most of the mood music we're getting out of Brussels is very different, as you know, from the mood music that we were getting at the time of the Scottish referendum. They know that the UK as a whole is leaving. There is a lot to be said from their perspective for rewarding Scotland for being a good European and for allowing Scotland to continue. The European Union, as Eurosceptics constantly say, is in the business of expansion. It's in the business of having members and people who are enthusiastically committed, and Scotland is.
And the expansion of the EU for new members includes taking the euro, and it includes becoming part of Schengen. And of course, if an independent Scotland was to be part of Schengen, there would have to be border controls at Carlisle and Berwick. So this is uncharted territory.
It's all uncharted territory. And in Northern Ireland, as you know, people are having a vigorous debate about what this means for Ireland.
But Ireland's not a member of Schengen.
But in terms of having an open border or not, because the government has made it clear to Irish politicians that there would not be a hard border.
Because it's not a member of Schengen, whereas you may have to accept membership of Schengen as the price for becoming a member of the EU.
But you'll remember that Michael and his colleagues said that if we voted for independence, there would have to be a hard border. So you rightly say,
well, you all
Andrew,
said lots of things that
as you rightly say, a lot of these issues are up for negotiations.
But
we're early days.
It would be a huge gamble, would it not, for Scotland to vote to leave the United Kingdom, particularly given the economics of oil these days and so on, without being sure that you would be able to join the European Union, and again to tell the Scottish people, because this was one of the reasons you lost last time, what will be the currency?
You're absolutely correct. We've got to be rock solid on the economy this time. We've got to build a case, which I'm glad Michael's having such a good time.
He seems to be enjoying himself.
Absolutely.
I hear some snorting down the line.
You know, I remember when he thought that sending the Stone of Destiny back to Scotland would settle all this. In fact, I made a film with Sarah Smith about it for Newsnight.
Are you playing for time here?
You're absolutely. I know I'm trying to tell an amusing anecdote. You're absolutely right that the case on the economy has got to be rock solid, which is why Andrew Wilson is heading up a commission on precisely this to answer these questions.
Michael Forsyth, to some extent, as a staunch unionist, have you not already lost the argument in that there is no question that Scotland and England are going their separate ways? They may stay within the United Kingdom, that's a different matter, but they are becoming very different countries, very different in many ways from the time when you were Secretary of State for Scotland. And even your own party is styling herself, Ruth Davidson, as an independently minded Scottish Conservative. Michael Forsyth, that was to you.
Yeah, sorry, the line went dead for a moment there. Yes, of course, that is an inevitable consequence of devolution. I mean, it was one of the reasons why I opposed it back in 1996.
You said there was no demand for it, actually, I remember.
Pardon?
You actually said there was no demand for it. I interviewed you, and you told me there was no demand for the Scottish people for home rule. You said it repeatedly.
Yeah, and unlike you guys, we had a referendum, and I accept the results of democratically held referenda. And so we have got a Scottish Parliament which has got more powers, and therefore that has changed the position. And of course, we're going to have to look at how that affects other parts of the United Kingdom. People are looking at having a more federal kind of structure, which will maintain stability. But what worries me is that all this chatter about having independence in Scotland when there is a deficit of some £15 billion is hugely damaging to Scotland's investment prospects, and it's making Scotland an area where business is not going to invest until this matter is settled, which it was in 2014.
We need to end it there, but I'm sure the argument's clearly not going away, so we'll be able to come back to a number of these points in the weeks and months and probably years ahead.
You're loving it.
Carry on.